My sister slept with my fiancé and handed me a USB drive before she fled. That night was supposed to be the happiest of my life. My engagement party, in my parents' home, with everyone I loved. Trevor, my fiancé, was the center of attention, smiling and accepting congratulations. But something felt wrong. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself I was just overly stressed. Yet I could not help but notice how Trevor kept glancing at his phone every few minutes, his face flashing with an anxiety that others might not have seen, but I did. I also saw my sister, Clara, standing in a corner, unusually quiet, her gaze not joyful but fixed on Trevor. The unease made it impossible for me to sit still. A little later, I saw Clara signal to Trevor to meet her in a secluded corner. I told myself it was none of my business, but my feet moved on their own. I hid behind a wall, my heart pounding. I could not hear much, only fragmented words, but they were enough to send a chill down my spine. Too dangerous. The evidence. That was Clara's voice. What evidence? What the hell was going on? I could not stand it any longer. I had to find out. I walked around to the hallway, planning to intercept Trevor as he passed. And that is when I saw them. My brain seemed to shut down for a second. What was I seeing? My sister? And Trevor? Right here? His body was pressed against hers, and they were kissing. All the sounds of the party, the laughter, the music faded into a dull roar in my ears. It felt as if someone had just sucked all the air out of my lungs. I could not think, just stood rooted to the spot, staring at the unbelievable scene before me. But something did not add up. When Clara's eyes over Trevor's shoulder met mine, they were not triumphant. They were panicked and held a desperate, agonizing pain, as if she wanted to say something but could not. Trevor jerked around. He saw me, and the confusion on his face quickly morphed into a cold fury. But that anger was not directed at me. It was aimed straight at Clara, like a deadly warning. That was the moment that snapped me out of my paralysis. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just backed away step by step like a wounded animal seeking an escape. I had to get out of there. Immediately. I turned and walked away, my pace quickening until I was almost running, moving past the smiling faces of the guests without seeing anyone. I had only one thought: get out of this house. It was not until the cold night air hit my face that I realized I was trembling. I threw myself into my car, slammed the door shut, and that is when the collapse came. I buried my head in the steering wheel, trying to breathe but unable to. I thought I was running from a blatant betrayal, but in reality, I was running from a truth that was far more complex and terrifying, a truth I was not ready to face. I ran. I went to Seattle, a city where no one knew my name, and I buried myself in work. Interior architecture had clear rules. Lines had to be parallel, corners had to be square, everything could be measured and controlled. It was the kind of order my life no longer had. I lived day to day in a state of controlled numbness. I worked, ate dinner alone, and tried not to think. I had cut off contact with almost everyone. My parents' calls were answered with brief text messages. Clara's calls I ignored. Every time her name appeared on the screen, the scene in the hallway replayed in my mind, as sharp as a shard of broken glass. The pain did not disappear. It just subsided into a constant, low hum in the back of my mind. It took months for my life to find any kind of rhythm, even if it was a dull, mechanical one. I worked, I went home, and I avoided all unnecessary social interaction. That is when I met Damien. He was not a friend or someone I met at a bar. He was a client, a man who hired me to redesign his office. Our first meetings were strictly about work, materials, blueprints, budgets. I kept my distance, saying only what was necessary. I had built my walls very high, and I had no intention of lowering them for anyone. But Damien was different. He did not try to break them down. He simply respected them. He was patient, he listened to my ideas with genuine interest, and he never crossed the professional boundary. He did not ask about my personal life, did not offer empty compliments. It was that professionalism and respect, paradoxically, that made me feel safe. Gradually, The work meetings started to last a little longer, interspersed with small talk about a book or a movie. Then one day, after a meeting, he asked casually, "Do you have any plans for the weekend?" My first instinct was to lie, to say I was busy. It was the safe answer, but something in his sincerity made me pause. I looked at him, a calm, undemanding man who had spent weeks working with me without ever making me feel uneasy. "I do not have any plans," I replied, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a small spark of warmth instead of vigilance. Our relationship did not start with a lightning bolt. It began with a conversation, then a coffee, then a dinner. It was built on the patience and sense of security he provided, something more precious than passion. Damien was not the one who pulled me out of the wreckage. He was the one who patiently sat beside it, waiting until I was ready to stand up on my own. The peace I found with Damien inadvertently allowed the undercurrents of the past to surface. When you are no longer struggling to survive day to day, your mind starts to have time to look back. One evening, while browsing the news online, a headline caught my eye. InvestCorp scandal. Hundreds of investors lose everything. Suspicions of large-scale fraud. That name, InvestCorp, my heart tightened. A faint memory surfaced. Trevor boasting about it, about a surefire deal. My first reaction was a fierce denial. I immediately closed the article. I did not want to know. I did not want any thread connecting my present to that past. But the seed of doubt had been planted. A few weeks later, I needed to find an old contract for work. I had to open the external hard drive I had brought from my old life, a box of memories I had tried to leave untouched. While searching, I accidentally clicked on a folder named Cayman Trip 2021. It was a trip Trevor had said was for work. A morbid curiosity compelled me. I opened it. Among the beach photos, there was a picture of Trevor having dinner with a group of people, and on the blurry sign behind them I could read the words, InvestCorp Annual Conference. My blood ran cold. He had lied. It was not just a coincidence. The article I had tried to ignore came back to haunt me. That night, I sat in front of my computer, not with the focus of an investigator, but with the trembling of someone facing a truth they did not want to believe. I opened the old email account Trevor and I had shared. I did not search systematically. I just typed his name into the search bar and started scrolling aimlessly, like watching a horror movie when you already know the ending. Most of it was meaningless, but then I found it. An email Trevor had sent to himself, probably for his records, with the subject line logo idea, Project C. I opened the attachment. It was a logo sketch for a consulting firm, a logo I had helped him refine last year, when he said it was just a side project for fun, and the name of that consulting firm matched one of the shell companies mentioned in the article about the InvestCorp fraud. A wave of nausea rose in my throat. I had not just been deceived romantically. I had unknowingly become a part of his scam. He had used me, used my creativity, for his own dirty purposes. The pain of being betrayed by a lover was now replaced by a different feeling, far more humiliating and disgusting, the feeling of a fool. Anger began to rise. It was not hot, not explosive. It was cold, and it brought with it a terrifying clarity. I could not stay in Seattle and continue to pretend the past was dead. It was not dead. It was alive, breathing, and probably still harming others. My first instinct was to call Damien, to tell him everything, to seek comfort, but I stopped myself. What did I really know about Damien, other than that he was kind and patient? I had made the mistake of placing my complete trust in a man once before. I could not repeat it. This was my mess. I had to clean it up myself. I opened my phone and looked at my contacts. For the first time in months, I did not feel a sharp pain when I saw the name Clara. Instead, there was a huge nagging question. The panic in her eyes that night. Trevor's warning to her. What did she know? What had she been trying to tell me? I also thought of my parents. My father's call the night I left. Trevor explained everything. It was just a misunderstanding. They had chosen to believe him. Why? For the sake of appearances? Or for some other reason? Trevor had once excitedly told my father about a golden investment opportunity. A terrifying thought struck me. This was not just about me. It was much bigger. I could not run anymore. I went to the airline's website, without a moment's hesitation. I booked a plane ticket, the earliest flight home the next morning. I was not going back to make peace. I was not going back to cry. I was going back for answers. And this time, I would not believe any explanations. I would only believe what I found out for myself. I did not announce my return. I just called my mother on Saturday morning and said, "I will be home for dinner tonight, and I am bringing a friend." The silence on the other end of the line lasted a few seconds, long enough for me to hear everything she did not say. But in the end, my mother, obsessed with maintaining the image of a perfect family, replied, "That is wonderful, dear. We will be so happy to have you." Her voice held an undeniable tension. When Damien and I walked through the door, I immediately understood why. Trevor was sitting there, right in the armchair in the living room, as if he had never left. Seeing me, he stood up, trying to force a smile, but it looked strained and unnatural. "Cassidy, you are back." The blood in my veins turned to ice. They had set this up. They had not called me back to listen. They had called me back to fix things, to force me into a fake reconciliation. In that moment, I felt Damien's hand gently squeeze mine under the table, a light but firm pressure. It was a reminder. You are not alone. You are not the same girl who ran away that night. And then I saw Clara. She was sitting in a single chair, separate from the group, almost invisible. She only nodded a greeting to me, her face a cold, emotionless mask. But for a moment, her eyes met mine, a complex look filled with something I could not name. Dinner was a form of psychological torture. The atmosphere was so thick you could cut it with a knife. My parents tried to steer the conversation with meaningless topics. The weather, my work in Seattle, a neighbor who had just sold their house. No one dared to mention the elephant in the room. Trevor barely ate. He kept glancing at his phone under the table, and each time his face grew paler. He looked like a cornered animal searching for an escape. It was Clara who lit the fuse, but not with a direct attack. During an awkward silence, she slowly put down her fork, gazed idly out the window, and said, her voice even but loud enough for everyone to hear, "I've been reading the news lately, and the financial world seems so frightening. Money just vanishes in these tax havens like the Cayman Islands. It is unbelievable." The fork in Trevor's hand froze. He snapped his head up to look at Clara, his eyes full of warning. My father, perhaps to break the silence, spoke up. "It is all just fraud. Honest businessmen have no reason to hide money there." Clara smirked, an almost imperceptible smile, then turned to Trevor. "Is that right, Trevor? You are the expert. You must know all about these things." It was a perfect strike, innocent enough to be deniable, yet aimed directly at his weak spot. Trevor's face went white. He completely lost control. "You shut up," he hissed, the words almost a snarl. "What do you know about anything?" Everyone was stunned. My mother stammered, "Trevor, dear, do not you pretend to be innocent," Trevor continued, pointing a finger at Clara, his panic making him lose his composure. "You think I do not know what you are trying to do? Those contracts, that investment fund, they were supposed to be untraceable." He had blurted it out. He had confirmed it all himself. Investment fund, untraceable contracts. My father froze, the color draining from his face. "What fund? Trevor, what are you talking about?" But it was too late. Trevor realized what he had just said. In a state of extreme panic, he shoved his chair back violently and stormed out of the room. "I have to go." In the chaos, while my parents were still in shock, Clara quietly stood up and followed him outside. My heart was pounding. This was it, the answer. I shot to my feet, ignoring my parents' calls, leaving Damien with a reassuring nod, and followed them into the backyard. The cold night air hit my face, but it could not quell the turmoil in my chest. Under the dim garden lights, I saw Trevor with his back to me, running his hands through his perfect hair, pacing like a caged animal. Clara stood opposite him, arms crossed, her expression like ice. "You are insane," Trevor hissed, his voice filled with rage. "You ruined everything. Everything." "I ruined it?" Clara laughed, a humorless, cutting sound. "You are the one who ruined it, Trevor. The moment you signed that first fraudulent contract." Trevor spun around, his eyes wild. "Do not you dare blame me. You are the one who seduced me." "Enough," I said, my voice trembling but firm. They both jumped and turned to look at me. Trevor looked as if he had seen a ghost. He stammered, "Cassidy, this is not what you think." Then he shot Clara, a look of pure hatred before turning and bolting into the darkness, disappearing behind the trees. Now it was just me and my sister. The silence was suffocating. Months of anger, pain, and confusion were bottled up inside me, ready to explode. "What the hell is going on, Clara?" I asked, my voice cracking. "That scene in the hallway that night, and now this? You owe me an explanation." Clara did not look at me. She stared into the empty space and let out a long sigh, as if releasing a burden she had carried for too long. "That is right," she said, her voice weary. "The scene in the hallway. Do you think I wanted to do that? Do you think I enjoyed touching him?" She turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw the exhaustion in her eyes. "He was targeting Mom and Dad's retirement fund, Cassidy, their entire life savings. He had a plan to drain it after he married you, and then he was going to create false evidence to pin it all on me." My head was spinning. I could not believe what I was hearing. "How? How did you know?" "I had suspected him for a long time," Clara said, her voice flat. "That perfect exterior, the promises that were too good to be true, it was not real. I found a ledger he had hidden in his study, and encrypted messages on a second phone. I tried to warn Mom and Dad." She gave a bitter laugh, but they did not believe me. They were blinded by their golden son-in-law. "They said I was jealous. They said I was trying to ruin your happiness. They told me to be quiet, for the family's reputation." All the pieces started to fit together. My father's phone call, my mother's silence. They had not been ignorant. They had chosen not to believe. "So, that night," I stammered. "I had to do it," Clara interrupted, her voice breaking. "I knew you would never believe my words. You were blindly in love with him. I had to make you hate him. I had to make you leave him, at any cost. It was the only way to get you out of the game, to protect you. I am sorry, Cassidy. I am so sorry for hurting you, but I had no other choice." I stood there, stunned, trying to breathe. The betrayal I had carried in my heart for months was, in fact, a cruel act of self-sacrifice. Clara stepped forward, reached into her coat pocket, and pulled out a small object, a USB drive. She pressed it into my hand. Her palm was ice cold. "Everything is in here," she said in a whisper. "The emails, the fake bank account statements, his entire fraud scheme, and recordings of conversations between him and me, the evidence that I had to trade so much to get." She looked deep into my eyes. "I have done my part. Now it is up to you." I stood in the cold garden, the tiny USB drive feeling as heavy as a stone in my palm. Clara was gone, leaving me alone with the newly revealed truth. I went back inside, not looking into the dining room where my parents sat in a dead silence. I found Damien standing in the hall, his expression full of concern. I could not speak. I just held out my hand and gave him the USB drive. He looked at it, then at me, and seemed to understand everything. "Let us go," he said gently, putting his arm around my shoulders and leading me to the car. That night, in Damien's apartment, I just sat on the sofa, curled up in a blanket. He plugged the USB drive into his laptop. I did not look at the screen. I could not. I only heard the steady clicking of the mouse and his long, heavy sighs. After a long time, he spoke, his voice deep and full of empathy. "Cassidy, everything in here. It matches everything I have been investigating." I looked up at him. "You have been investigating?" Damien nodded, his eyes holding a deep sadness. "My family was one of the victims of InvestCorp. I have been searching for evidence against Trevor for the past year. He paused, then continued. That is why I sought you out in the first place. I am sorry. Another truth, another shock. But strangely, I did not feel betrayed. I just felt a strange connection in our shared pain. Do you have enough now? I asked, my voice hoarse. With what Clara gave you, he replied. We have more than enough. 2 days later, everything collapsed. Damien had turned all the evidence over to the authorities. The news exploded. Trevor's face was on every television channel, not as a brilliant financial expert, but as a wanted man. The headline crawled across the screen. Trevor Vance, key figure in InvestCorp fraud scheme wanted for questioning. The scandal was no longer a quiet suspicion. It was a raw, exposed truth for the whole world to see. With all of that in hand, I drove to my parents' house. They were sitting in the living room, the television off. The house was frighteningly silent. They knew why I was there. I did not sit down. I just stood in the middle of the room. Why? I asked, a single question that held the weight of months of pain. My father avoided my gaze. My mother began to cry softly. You knew, did you not? I continued, my voice cold, emotionless. You knew Clara had warned you. You knew something was wrong. We did not know it would come to this. My mother stammered. You did not know? I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. Or you did not want to know? Clara told me. She told me how you ignored her. My father finally spoke, his voice weary and defeated. Clara always had a prejudice against Trevor. We just thought she was being jealous. Besides Trevor, he was very convincing. He talked about the family's reputation, about how you would have such a good life. I looked him straight in the eye. Is that all? Just for the family's reputation? He was silent for a long time. Then he confessed. A confession that destroyed what was left of my family. He mentioned an investment opportunity. My father's voice was barely a whisper. A small part of the InvestCorp fund. He promised a good return. So that was it. The final, raw, and ugliest truth. They were not just blindly trusting. They were not just worried about appearances. They were blinded by greed. I looked at the two people who had given me life, and for the first time, I saw nothing but strangers. So you sold both of your daughters, I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. One you silenced, the other you pushed into the lion's den, all for the sake of appearances and a little profit. I did not wait for their reply. I turned and walked out the door, closing behind me not just the door to the house, but the door to a childhood that had completely rotted away. After that confrontation, my parents' house became a place of terrifying silence. The invisible wall between them and my sister and me had been erected, not with anger but with disappointment and silence. I knew that deep down they were facing the consequences of their choice. Clara's silence and my departure were not impulsive acts, but direct results of the pressure they had applied, of their choice to believe an outsider over their own daughter. That rift, I knew, would probably never heal. A week later, I went to find Clara. She was sitting in our favorite cafe, staring out the window with a distant look in her eyes. I sat down across from her, and for a few minutes, we said nothing. The air between us was no longer tense, but it was not easy. I am sorry. I was the first to speak, my voice hoarse. I am sorry for not believing you, for hating you. Clara shook her head, a sad smile touching her lips. It was not your fault, Cassidy. I chose that path. I knew it would hurt you. But you could have told me, I said, a hint of accusation still remaining. Do you really think you would have listened? She asked back, a question that was both direct and painful. And I knew the answer was no. The me of that time, lost in blind love, would never have believed her. Sometimes, she continued, to save someone from a fire, you have to pull them out forcefully, even if you know they will get scraped. We sat there, looking at each other, and for the first time in years, I truly saw my sister. I saw the sacrifice, the loneliness, and the strength she had shouldered all alone. Forgiveness did not come easily. It was not just a simple word. It came from this deep understanding, from the realization that love sometimes takes the most thorny and painful forms. I reached out my hand and placed it on hers. "Thank you, Clara." She squeezed my hand gently. A reluctant but genuine hug afterward said it all. Our relationship would never be the same. It would no longer be innocent and carefree, but it would be rebuilt on a new foundation, a foundation of truth, sacrifice, and a connection deeper than ever before. 1 year later, the Seattle sky was unusually clear today. I was standing on a balcony that still smelled of fresh paint, looking out at the city skyline. This was the first apartment that Damien and I had designed and owned together. The legal battle with Trevor and InvestCorp was over. He had been arrested in a South American country after months on the run. A small portion of the stolen money was recovered, but for most of the victims, including Damien's family, it was little comfort. Justice had been served, but the scars remained. My relationship with my parents was still distant, limited to brief holiday calls. But my relationship with Clara was different. We talked every week, sharing the small things in our lives, slowly rebuilding what had been lost. Damien stepped out onto the balcony, wrapped his arms around me from behind, and placed a light kiss on my hair. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I was thinking about a year ago," I replied, leaning my head against his shoulder. "I thought I would never be able to trust anyone again." He turned me around to face him, his gaze as calm and warm as the first day we met. "You do not have to trust me," he said seriously. "You just need to trust yourself. Trust your judgment. Trust your strength to get through anything. I am just here to walk beside you." And that was the difference. Our love was not a whirlwind that swept me away, nor was it a shelter for me to hide from the world. It was a safe space where we could both be ourselves, with all our scars and imperfections. He took a small velvet box from his pocket. My heart skipped a beat. "I know you have walked a very dark road," he said, his voice sincere and slightly trembling. "And I cannot promise that the road ahead will always be smooth. But I promise to always walk beside you, no matter what happens. Cassidy Moore, will you build a home with me, not just with bricks and mortar, but with trust and sincerity?" Tears began to stream down my cheeks, but this time, they were tears of happiness. "I will," I whispered. He slipped the ring onto my finger. It was not a flashy diamond. It was a deep blue sapphire, clear and profound, just like our love. We stood there, holding each other, looking out at the city lights. The picture of my life was no longer as perfect as I had once imagined. It had cracks, dark patches. But it was those very cracks that allowed the real light to shine through, and for the first time in my life, I saw that it was truly, authentically beautiful. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat.